Hi, Aquarius. This reading already feels incredibly deep, and honestly, I feel like something important is happening behind the scenes right now. There is someone here who cannot seem to stop thinking about you. Okay, they may not be saying much. They may not be showing everything they're feeling. But the energy coming through is strong. It's almost like this person has been trying to move on, trying to focus on other things, trying to convince themselves that everything is fine. But it isn't, because the more distance there has been, the more they've been forced to sit with their own thoughts. And Aquarius, those thoughts keep leading back to you. I keep picking up on someone who is seeing this connection very differently than they did before. They're starting to recognize things they couldn't see in the past. The impact you had on their life, the space you still occupy in their heart, the things left unsaid, the choices they wish they could revisit. And honestly, I don't think this realization happened all at once. It feels like something that has been quietly building for a while, a slow awakening, a series of moments that keep bringing your energy back into their awareness. Because what I'm seeing here isn't someone who has forgotten. It's someone who is finally understanding, and as we move into these cards, the story becomes even more interesting. Because the first card that immediately catches my attention is the Three of Swords. And, what strikes me isn't anger. It isn't bitterness. It's realization. It's the feeling of someone sitting alone with their own thoughts after everything has gotten quiet. You know when life stops distracting you for a moment? When there is no noise, no conversation, no constant activity pulling your attention somewhere else? That's what this feels like. This feels like someone finally having to sit with what happened. And as they're sitting there, Aquarius, your energy keeps showing up. Not because they're trying to think about you. Honestly, I think part of them has tried not to, but every road somehow circles back to the same place. Every memory, every unfinished conversation, every moment they brushed aside because they thought there would always be more time. It's almost like they're replaying certain choices in their head and seeing them from a completely different perspective now. Okay, the world is sitting right beside the Three of Swords, and this combination feels incredibly significant because I keep getting the sense that this person believed a chapter was finished. They thought they had already processed everything. They thought they had already moved on. But something isn't sitting the way they expected it to. Something keeps pulling their attention backward, not into the past itself, but into the meaning of the past. And that's a very different thing, because they're no longer looking at what happened through the eyes of who they were back then. They're looking at it through the eyes of who they're becoming, and that changes everything. The things they dismissed suddenly matter. The things they overlooked suddenly feel important. The things they assumed would always be there suddenly feel uncertain. And Aquarius, I think that's where a lot of this emotional awakening is coming from. Because the more they reflect, the harder it becomes to convince themselves that you were just another chapter. You don't feel like that in their energy. You feel like someone who left a mark, someone who changed something, someone whose absence created a silence they didn't expect to notice this much. And honestly, the Nine of Swords feels heavy here. Not dramatic, not chaotic, just heavy. Like someone lying awake long after everyone else has gone to sleep, thinking, replaying, questioning, wondering if things could have unfolded differently, wondering if they truly understood what was in front of them when they had it. Because I'm picking up on a person who thought they had more control over their feelings than they actually did. A person who may have convinced themselves that they were fine, that they were unaffected, that they could simply keep moving forward. But feelings don't always work like that. Sometimes they wait. Sometimes they stay quiet. And then one day they ask to be acknowledged. And that is exactly what this energy feels like. Acknowledgement. Not from you, from them. It's almost like they're being confronted by their own truth. And the more honest they become with themselves, the harder it becomes to ignore how much Aquarius has mattered throughout this entire journey. Because the Five of Cups appears next. And immediately I feel reflection. I feel someone looking back. Not just at what was lost, but at what was meaningful. There is a difference. Because this doesn't feel like someone obsessing over mistakes. This feels like someone recognizing value, recognizing connection, recognizing that certain people enter our lives and quietly change us forever. And whether they intended to or not, Aquarius, that's exactly what I feel happened here. You shifted something inside this person. You challenged them. You expanded their perspective. You made them feel things they weren't expecting to feel. And I don't think they fully understood the impact of that until much later. Until distance created enough space for clarity to arrive. Because honestly, the energy right now feels like someone standing in front of a truth that can no longer be ignored. And as these cards continue to unfold, I can already see another layer beginning to emerge. It's one that reveals how differently this person is starting to see you compared to before, because the energy shifts the moment the star appears. And honestly, Aquarius, this is where things start feeling very different. The sadness is still there in the background, but it feels quieter somehow, more reflective, more aware. It's almost like this person has stopped looking at you through the lens of what happened between you and started looking at you for who you actually are. And that realization feels powerful, because I keep hearing someone think, why haven't I been able to replace this connection? Not in a dramatic way, not in an obsessive way, just genuine confusion. Like they genuinely believed life would keep moving. New people would arrive, new experiences would happen, and eventually the feelings would fade into the background. But they didn't. Something about you remained. Something about your energy stayed with them. The star feels almost impossible for them to ignore. It's like every time they think they've finally figured things out, they find themselves remembering something about you. The way you saw situations differently. The way you challenged their perspective. The way you made them think about things they normally would have brushed aside. And the strange thing is, the more time passes, the clearer those memories become. Not weaker, clearer. Okay. The Seven of Pentacles is giving me a really interesting feeling here. This person keeps looking back at everything that was shared between you. Conversations, experiences, moments that may not have seemed important at the time. And they're viewing them differently now. It's almost like someone walking through an old house and suddenly noticing details they never paid attention to before. Details that were always there. They just weren't ready to see them. And I think that's exactly what's happening emotionally. They're realizing that this connection affected them far more deeply than they originally admitted. Because Aquarius, you never felt ordinary to this person. I don't care how detached they appeared. I don't care how calm they acted. There was always something about you that stood apart from everyone else. And honestly, I think that realization is making them a little uncomfortable. Because the more they acknowledge it, the harder it becomes to explain away. The Emperor appears here, and immediately I feel someone trying to stay composed, trying to stay logical, trying to keep their emotions organized. But underneath all that control, there is vulnerability, there is uncertainty. There is someone questioning assumptions they once felt confident about. Because when they look at you now, they don't just see a person. They see someone who influenced their growth, someone who challenged them to become more honest with themselves, someone whose absence revealed things their presence never had the chance to. And that's not easy to process, especially for someone who likes feeling in control of their emotions, especially for someone who prefers certainty, because this connection seems to have created questions they weren't expecting. Questions about love, questions about timing, questions about what actually matters. And then the Empress enters the reading. Okay, this feels beautiful, because the moment this card arrives, the energy softens. I don't feel pressure. I don't feel urgency. I just feel appreciation, genuine appreciation. Like this person has started seeing the full picture, not just the attraction, not just the chemistry, not just the excitement. They're seeing the comfort, the warmth, the understanding, the emotional safety that existed here. And I think that's why letting go has been so difficult, because they're realizing they weren't simply attached to a person. They were attached to how they felt when they were around you, the version of themselves that emerged around you, the version that felt more open, more hopeful, more authentic. And honestly, the deeper I go into this energy, the more I feel someone quietly admitting something they haven't wanted to admit for a very long time. That despite everything that has happened, despite distance, despite silence, despite all the reasons they told themselves they should move on, a part of them never actually stopped carrying this connection. And as the truth becomes harder to deny, I can already see another layer beginning to surface, because someone here isn't just reflecting anymore. They're starting to watch more closely. They're starting to wonder what Aquarius is doing now. And that curiosity feels stronger than they're letting on, because curiosity has a strange way of growing when answers are missing. And honestly, Aquarius, that's exactly what I'm feeling here. This doesn't feel like someone rushing toward action. If anything, it feels like someone slowing themselves down on purpose. Someone who keeps getting close to doing something and then stops. Not because they don't care, not because they've lost interest, but because they're thinking about every possible outcome before making a move. The Page of Swords immediately catches my attention. And this energy feels observant, quiet, almost invisible at times. I keep seeing someone checking in from a distance, wondering how you're doing, wondering what's changed, wondering who you've become during all this time. It's interesting because I don't feel desperation. I feel fascination. Like they're trying to understand the version of Aquarius that exists today, because in their mind, you're no longer frozen in an old memory. You're still evolving, still growing, still moving through life, and for some reason, that realization makes them feel both excited and nervous. Sometimes people assume that if they think about someone long enough, eventually they'll understand them. But that's not what's happening here. The more they think about you, the more they realize there are parts of you they've never fully understood. And oddly enough, that makes them even more interested. Because this person keeps feeling pulled toward your energy, pulled toward your perspective, pulled toward whatever it is that makes Aquarius, Aquarius. Okay, the Seven of Swords is creating a very specific atmosphere around this reading. I don't feel manipulation. I don't feel deception. I feel strategy, careful strategy. Like someone sitting at a table replaying conversations that haven't even happened yet. Thinking about what they would say. Thinking about what they shouldn't say. Thinking about how to approach someone they still care about without making things awkward, without creating more distance, without risking something they secretly value. And honestly, the amount of mental energy being spent here feels significant because this isn't somebody acting impulsively. This is somebody planning, adjusting, reconsidering, changing their approach again and again, almost like they're trying to find the exact words before they ever speak them. And that brings me directly into the Magician, because once this card enters the energy, I start feeling intention, strong intention, not necessarily action, but intention. There is a difference. This person seems to be realizing that thoughts alone aren't enough anymore, that feelings kept entirely inside eventually become heavy. That silence eventually starts asking questions of its own. And I think that's where they are emotionally. Standing somewhere between silence and expression, between observation and communication, between wondering and actually reaching out. Honestly, it feels like they've been having entire conversations with you inside their head, thinking about what they would tell you, thinking about how you might respond, thinking about whether enough time has passed, thinking about whether you'd even want to hear what they have to say. And every time they imagine those conversations, another layer of emotion seems to surface, because beneath all the thinking, beneath all the planning, there is something much simpler, something much harder to explain away. The Ace of Cups, and the moment this card appears, everything softens. All the overthinking, all the strategy, all the mental calculations. For a second, it all becomes quieter, because underneath everything else, I keep feeling genuine emotion. Not perfect emotion, not uncomplicated emotion, just honest emotion. The kind that survives despite confusion. The kind that remains present even when someone tries to distract themselves from it. And what stands out to me most is that this person doesn't seem nearly as focused on the past as they once were. They're becoming more focused on possibility, more focused on connection, more focused on what might happen if they stopped hiding behind observation and allowed themselves to be seen too. Because Aquarius, the energy feels less like someone looking through a window now, and more like someone standing near a doorway, still hesitating, still thinking, still questioning, but no longer pretending they don't care. And the deeper this energy unfolds, the more I sense another shift beginning beneath the surface. Because someone who has spent this long watching, wondering, and planning eventually starts confronting something even bigger than curiosity. Their own feelings about what love has quietly become. Because eventually curiosity stops being the biggest question. What starts taking up more space is understanding. And honestly, Aquarius, that's exactly where this energy seems to be heading. The moon appears and the atmosphere changes immediately. Everything feels quieter, more introspective. Almost like this person has entered a chapter where they're no longer trying to figure out what you're feeling. They're trying to understand themselves, and that feels significant. Because I keep sensing someone who spent a very long time believing they understood love, believing they understood relationships, believing they knew exactly what mattered and what didn't. But something about this connection has challenged those assumptions, not loudly, not dramatically, just steadily, like water reshaping stone over time. Sometimes growth doesn't happen because somebody teaches us something. Sometimes growth happens because we meet someone who makes our old beliefs stop making sense. And Aquarius, that's what this feels like. The moon feels almost uncomfortable here, not because anything bad is happening, but because hidden emotions have become harder to ignore. Questions they've avoided keep resurfacing. Thoughts they've pushed away keep returning. And every time they try to dismiss them, another layer seems to emerge. Because underneath everything, I feel someone beginning to realize that love might be much deeper than they originally believed. Not just attraction, not just chemistry, not just convenience. Something else, something harder to explain. Okay. The Hanged Man is creating this fascinating pause in the energy, and it doesn't feel like stagnation. It feels like perspective, like someone standing still long enough to finally see what they've been missing. Honestly, I keep seeing a person revisiting old memories and noticing entirely different things than before. Moments they overlooked. Conversations they didn't fully appreciate. Things Aquarius said that seemed simple at the time but carry a completely different meaning now. It's almost like they're reading a book for the second time and discovering pages they somehow missed during the first reading. And the more they reflect, the more they realize this connection wasn't fitting into the categories they originally assigned to it, because Aquarius never really fit inside those categories. You challenged them, you surprised them, you made them question assumptions they didn't even know they were carrying. And that process seems to be continuing long after certain conversations ended, long after certain moments passed, because growth has a strange way of lingering. The King of Swords enters next, and immediately I feel someone trying to make sense of everything intellectually, trying to organize emotions, trying to find logic, trying to understand why this connection still occupies so much mental space. Because this person likes answers, they like certainty, they like understanding, but feelings don't always cooperate with logic. And that's part of what they're learning. Not everything meaningful can be measured. Not everything important can be explained away. Not every connection follows predictable rules. The more they think about Aquarius, the more they encounter experiences that don't fit neatly into the boxes they once relied on. And honestly, I think that's humbling them. In a good way. It's making them softer, more open, more willing to admit they don't have everything figured out. Because the version of this person I'm seeing now feels very different from the version that existed before. Not perfect, not completely transformed, just more aware, more honest, more willing to acknowledge complexity. And then the Queen of Swords appears. Okay, this energy feels powerful, because suddenly I sense respect, deep respect, not idealization, not fantasy, respect. The kind that develops when someone recognizes another person's strength, their wisdom, their authenticity. And I think Aquarius, this person has begun to understand something important about you. You were never asking them to become someone else. You were asking them to become more honest, more genuine, more connected to what they actually feel. And that realization seems to be changing the way they think about relationships altogether. Because they're beginning to see that real connection isn't about controlling outcomes. It isn't about always being right. It isn't about maintaining some perfect image. It's about showing up, honestly. And for someone who once relied heavily on certainty, that's a huge shift. The deeper this realization settles in, the less interested they become in old patterns that once felt comfortable. Because some of those patterns aren't fitting anymore. Some old beliefs are beginning to crack, and as those cracks widen, another question starts emerging in their mind. What would happen if they stopped analyzing every feeling and started thinking seriously about the future they actually want? Because once somebody starts asking themselves what they truly want, the conversation inside them changes. The questions become different. Less about what happened, less about what could have been done differently, and much more about what actually matters moving forward. Honestly, Aquarius, that's the shift I'm feeling here. The emotional fog that surrounded this connection earlier feels thinner now, not completely gone, just clearer. And in that clarity, something surprising is happening. This person is beginning to think long-term, not in a rushed way, not in a fantasy-driven way, more like someone who has finally stopped running from their own feelings long enough to ask what place those feelings hold in their future. The Ten of Pentacles arrives, and immediately I feel like someone imagining stability, not excitement, not intensity, stability. Which is interesting because stability is rarely the first thing people think about when emotions are involved. But that's exactly why this feels important. Because this person is no longer evaluating this connection based solely on how it makes them feel in the moment. They're looking at it through a completely different lens. They're asking themselves who they trust, who they feel comfortable being themselves around, who brings a sense of peace instead of confusion. And Aquarius, your energy keeps appearing in those reflections, again and again, almost unexpectedly. Because I don't think this person's planned to arrive here emotionally. I think they genuinely believed their thoughts would lead somewhere else. But the deeper they go, the more they find themselves returning to the same conclusion. That some connections leave a lasting imprint for a reason. Okay, the King of Pentacles feels incredibly grounded. And honestly, I think this person is craving that groundedness right now. Life may have shown them how exhausting uncertainty can become, how draining it is to constantly question everything. how difficult it is to build something meaningful while pretending not to care. And because of that, they're becoming more selective about what deserves their energy, more selective about where they invest emotionally, more selective about who they allow into their inner world. And that's what stands out here. Because despite all the analysis, despite all the hesitation, despite all the time spent trying to understand this connection, they keep coming back to Aquarius. Not because they have all the answers, but because the feeling itself remains. And the longer it remains, the harder it becomes to dismiss. The Knight of Pentacles follows closely behind, and this energy feels deliberate, careful, measured, almost cautious. I don't get the feeling of somebody wanting to rush into anything. If anything, they're becoming more aware of the value of patience, more aware of the importance of building things correctly, because something inside them has matured, maybe not overnight, maybe not dramatically, but enough for them to recognize that meaningful connections deserve care. They deserve effort. They deserve consistency. And honestly, I think that's another reason Aquarius occupies such a unique space in their heart, because this connection has challenged them to become more intentional, more thoughtful, more accountable, not just with love, with themselves. And that's a lesson they don't seem to be taking lightly. The more I sit with this energy, the more I feel someone quietly imagining everyday moments. Not grand gestures, not dramatic scenes, ordinary moments, conversations over coffee, sharing news at the end of a long day, laughing about something completely random, feeling understood without needing to explain every detail. Those are the images floating through this reading. And that brings us to the Ten of Cups. Okay, this card changes the emotional atmosphere immediately, because suddenly I don't feel someone thinking about whether this connection matters. That question seems settled. What I feel instead is someone recognizing how much emotional fulfillment has been tied to this bond all along. It's almost like they're beginning to understand that happiness isn't always found in chasing something new. Sometimes it's found in recognizing the value of what has already touched your life. And honestly, that realization feels surprisingly emotional for them. Because I keep sensing a person who once focused heavily on logic, practicality, and self-protection. Yet here they are, finding themselves drawn toward thoughts that revolve around connection, companionship, and emotional closeness. Not because somebody forced them there, because their own heart gradually led them there. And the deeper this understanding settles in, the more another realization seems to emerge quietly beneath the surface. Because imagining a future is one thing. Actually considering what needs to be healed, released, or transformed before that future can exist. That's a completely different conversation. Because eventually there comes a moment when reflection starts becoming action. Not necessarily visible action, not dramatic action, but an internal shift. A point where someone stops asking whether a chapter mattered and starts asking what they want to do with everything they've learned from it. And honestly, Aquarius, that feels like where this energy is moving. Justice appears first, and immediately I feel balance trying to return. Not perfect balance, not instant resolution, just an honest desire to see things clearly, because something has changed in this person's perspective. They're no longer looking at the story through the lens of blame. They're not spending as much energy trying to decide who was right or who was wrong. Instead, I feel someone becoming more interested in understanding themselves, understanding you, understanding what actually happened beneath the surface. And that's a very different energy. Because when people stop defending themselves long enough to become curious, healing begins to enter the room. Okay, I keep seeing someone replaying old moments again, but this time without the emotional armor they once carried. And what stands out is how many things make sense now that didn't make sense before. Misunderstandings, silences, assumptions. All those little moments that seemed confusing at the time. It's almost like they're finally seeing the full picture instead of isolated pieces. And honestly, there is a softness here that wasn't present earlier in the reading. A willingness to admit that maybe neither person had all the answers. Maybe both people were carrying fears they didn't know how to communicate. Maybe some distance was created by confusion rather than lack of feeling. The Wheel of Fortune enters and the atmosphere begins to move. You can almost feel it, not externally, internally, like gears that have been stuck for a long time are finally starting to turn again. And what's interesting is that this movement doesn't feel forced. It feels natural, like something that has been slowly developing beneath the surface for a very long time. You know, sometimes people think change happens in one big moment, one dramatic realization, one life-changing conversation. But most of the time it doesn't happen that way. Most of the time change happens quietly. A little perspective here, a little growth there, a little healing somewhere else. And one day you realize you're not standing in the same place emotionally anymore. That's exactly what this feels like. Because the person who appears in this energy now doesn't feel identical to the person who appeared at the beginning of this reading. There is more awareness, more maturity, more emotional honesty, and perhaps most importantly, less resistance. Less resistance to their feelings, less resistance to what this connection means, less resistance to the possibility that some bonds continue affecting us long after we thought they would. The Four of Wands arrives, and honestly, this card changes everything, because suddenly I don't feel distance as strongly anymore. I feel alignment. Not complete alignment, not a finished story, just alignment. The kind that begins when two paths slowly stop moving away from each other. And what stands out here isn't passion, it's comfort. It's the feeling of emotional familiarity, the feeling of recognizing someone, the feeling of looking toward a connection and seeing possibility instead of confusion. And I think that's what surprises this person most, because for so long they've been analyzing, questioning, reflecting, trying to understand. Yet the deeper they go, the simpler the feeling becomes. They enjoy your presence, they value your energy, they feel connected to you, and beneath all the complexity, that truth remains remarkably consistent. Then the star appears again. Okay, this feels beautiful, not because it promises anything, not because it erases everything that came before, but because it brings hope back into the energy. A quiet hope, a mature hope, the kind that grows after difficult lessons, the kind that survives uncertainty, the kind that doesn't need to force anything. And Aquarius, what stands out to me most is that the star feels different now than it did earlier. Earlier, it felt like remembrance. Here, it feels like inspiration. Like someone looking ahead instead of looking behind. Someone beginning to believe that healing and connection don't have to exist separately. That understanding can create new possibilities. That growth can change the direction of a story. And as this energy continues unfolding, I can't help but feel that both people are standing much closer to a new chapter than they realize. Aquarius, that's where I'm going to leave this reading. And honestly, I feel like this story is still unfolding in ways that aren't fully visible yet. For now, the most important thing is simply honoring where you are, how you feel, and what your own heart is trying to show you. Thank you for allowing me to share this space with you. Your energy, your time, and your trust truly mean a lot. If this reading resonated, take it as a moment of reflection rather than a fixed outcome. Life has a beautiful way of revealing things one step at a time. Sending you so much love, Aquarius. Take care of yourself, and I'll see you in the next reading.